Well, hi there. This is a whale. And so is this. And so is this. And so is this. Whales of the infraorder Cetacea are some of the most well-known and beloved animals on the planet. So I was very surprised a few years back when I discovered this. A 13-meter, 15-ton whale with the face of a dolphin. What the heck was this thing? And how could I have gone my whole life as an animal fanatic with multiple degrees in biology and zoology without noticing that these colossal stretch dolphins existed? What are they? And what other whales are out there that somehow had snuck under my radar? Well, today I'm going to find out, because today we are going to examine all of the whales, how they're related to one another, and what makes each family unique. And we're gonna figure out exactly what this thing is. But to start, we should probably discuss what whales are and how they fit in with the rest of life on Earth. Whales are marine mammals. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't fish. A solid argument can be made that you are a fish. And you, after all, are more closely related to trout than trout are to sharks. So if trout and sharks are both fish, then so are you. And whales. But the reality is that the closest relatives of whales are other mammals, not fish like trout or sharks. Mammals are homeothermic vertebrates with hair and mammary glands. They produce milk. That is actually the defining characteristic of mammals. Whales specifically are placental or eutherian mammals. And since mammals evolved on land from other land-dwelling amniotes, it stands to reason that the ancestors of whales lived on land as well. Of course, just because it makes sense that their ancestors would have lived on land, it doesn't make it so. So what evidence is there that this is so? Well, for one thing, genetic and morphological analyses suggest that cetaceans are the closest living relatives to the hippopotamuses, which spend at least some time on land, and are part of the order Artiodactyla, the even-toed ungulates, like pigs, camels, antelope, deer, and cattle. Hence their multi-chambered stomachs. Now, most aquatic and marine fish swim with a side-to-side motion and have tail fins oriented up and down accordingly. This side-to-side bending continued on even as fish moved onto land. You see this very clearly today in amphibians and reptiles. Their limbs are held out to the side, sprawling, because that is the most conducive to movement when your spine moves side to side like a fish. But it does have a couple of downsides. First, it is mechanically easier to hold yourself off of the ground with your legs directly under you. This is especially true as organisms become very large. And second, if you have paired lungs, when you bend sideways, you compress one lung, pushing air out of it, and expand the other lung, pulling air in. In essence, as you run, bending side to side, air moves from one lung to the other, but it is very difficult to breathe while running. In groups like mammals and dinosaurs, these problems were alleviated by holding the legs under their bodies, erect. Of course, when your limbs are directly beneath you, bending your spine side to side does not help much with running. And so what you see in mammals, like cheetahs, is that running speed is increased dramatically by flexing the spine up and down and not side to side. And when mammals returned to the water, they retained that up and down vertebral flexibility that evolved on land. Or at least it would stand to reason that this is why whales still move like this today. But whales are very different from most other mammals, even hippos. For one thing, they don't have back legs. And their nostrils are on the top of their heads. This can lead us to make a couple of predictions. First, if the ancestors of whales lived on land, we would predict that there should exist fossils of animals more like whales than they are like other animals, but that have 4 legs. And we would also predict that those hind legs should be larger in older fossils, and progressively smaller as the fossils get younger. And when fossils of animals with attributes found today only in whales started to turn up, this is exactly the pattern that we found. Many whales even have vestigial pelvic remnants today, and modern whales are still sometimes even born with hind flippers, as the code for hind limbs are still in their DNA. Not to mention the fact they have fingers. And second, we would predict that if the ancestors of whales lived on land, we should find fossils of animals more like whales than they are like other animals, but with nostrils located at the end of the face. And that younger fossils should have the nostrils closer and closer to the top of the head. And we found that to be the case as well. So it seems that whales are indeed the descendants of terrestrial mammals. Not only does it make logical sense, but it is supported by the evidence that we can observe today. And that gets us back to this thing. What is it? And how does it fit in with the other whales? And are there other crazy groups of whales out there that have somehow flown under my radar? Or, since we're talking about whales, my sonar? The whales, infraorder Cetacea, are divided into two large clades. The toothed whales, Odontoceti, and the baleen whales, Mysticeti. Now you'll probably notice that both of these names end in the Latin ceti, which refers to a large sea monster. Appropriate. Odonto refers to teeth, which makes a lot of sense. Misty may refer to whalebone, a common name in the past for baleen, but it's probably more related to a transcriptional error from the writings of Aristotle. Today, there are 9 extant families of toothed whales and 3 families of baleen whales. And since my personal favorite whale is in the Odontoceti, we'll start there. In fact, let's just start with my favorite whale, the unfortunately named sperm whale, and its closest relative, the dwarf sperm whale. Sperm whales are the only members of the family Physeteridae. Physeter macrocephalus. Macro meaning big and cephalus meaning head. They have huge heads. And they can grow to be over 20 meters long, almost 70 feet, the largest of all of the toothed whales. Though most are somewhat smaller, with males being considerably larger than females. And almost a third of that length is just head. Macrocephalus. So why the huge head? Well, for one thing, they have the largest brain on Earth. But that really isn't the reason for the giant noggin. Their skull is actually long and skinny, unlike their heads, which are huge and bulbous. Most of it is filled with a liquid mixture of fats and waxes called spermaceti. Spermaceti was originally mistaken by whalers as being their semen, hence the unfortunate common name. But what it actually does is amplify the clicking sounds they use for echolocation and communication. It is also possible that it has a role in diving, though this is somewhat unsubstantiated. At the very least, it is important and it helps the whales hunt in the pitch black darkness. These are the deepest diving mammals on Earth. They can dive down as much as 2 kilometers, well over a mile, in search of their prey, giant squid. Big males will even hunt colossal squid under Antarctica, though they also hunt octopodes, sharks, rays, and smaller squid species. They're just unbelievably cool. They're found in waters all over the world. A few years ago, I had the huge privilege of seeing one off the coast of California, just a few meters from shore. I could identify it by its lack of a dorsal fin, wrinkly appearance, and blowhole located at the end of the nose and off to the left. It's my favorite whale. Their closest relatives are the much smaller dwarf and pygmy sperm whales of the family Kogiidae. The reality is that you're never going to confuse a Kogiid whale with a sperm whale. They are much smaller, with short, blunt heads with jaws adapted to suction feeding. They also lack the wrinkly appearance and possess a dorsal fin. They have a structure behind their heads that looks like, but isn't, a gill slit. Like their cousins, they have the spermaceti organ and dive deep to hunt squid, though not as deep, and they hunt much smaller squid. They also have very large brains. They are also found in oceans all over the world, except they do not go into the polar regions like their cousins. These two families are the most distantly related families to the other toothed whales. The next most distantly related family are the South Asian river dolphins of the family Platanistidae. These are freshwater dolphins from the rivers in Nepal, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. I say dolphins because these aren't really dolphins. They are toothed whales that look a bit like dolphins, but in reality, all of the toothed whales that we will mention after this point are more closely related to dolphins than are the platanistid whales. In fact, only the baleen whales and the two sperm whale families are less closely related to the dolphins. So they aren't dolphins, but they are quite interesting. Like dolphins, they have long, thin jaws, often called a beak. Jaws of this nature are indicative of many fish-eating animals, such as gharials, garfishes, herons, and true dolphins. Such jaws allow animals that do not practice suction feeding to catch fish using a sideways swiping action. Their teeth, like those of the gharial, interlock like a zipper and are visible even when the mouth is shut. Like other river dolphins, they live in rivers where visibility is often limited, so they have poor eyesight and hunt primarily with echolocation. And when I say poor, I mean they don't even have a lens in their eyes. They likely only detect light and darkness with their eyes. These guys are easily identified because they are the only cetaceans that swim on their sides, like flounders. They're small for cetaceans, ranging in size from about 2 to just a bit over 2.5 meters. Females are longer than males mostly because they have longer jaws as adults. They also lack the dorsal fin of true dolphins. These are very endangered, but if you are near a river in or around northern India and you see a dolphin that swims on its side and looks like its parents didn't choose one another based on sight, you probably have found a South Asian river dolphin. The next most distantly related family is the one that I discovered just a few years back that inspired this whole video. And speaking of this video, if you're enjoying it to this point and would like to see more like it in the future, please subscribe to this channel. But as for the whales that inspired this video, these are the beaked whales of the family Ziphioidae. These guys range in size from about 4 to 13 meters and weigh between 1 and 15 tons. So they're one of the bigger whales we've discussed so far, and yet I didn't know that they even existed. And as it turns out, they're one of the least well-known of all whales, so I guess my embarrassment could be worse. I mean, some people don't know that snakes have skeletons. It could be worse. Of course, you know, they probably don't have degrees in zoology, so. Anyway, these are fairly mysterious whales that are rarely encountered. They do seem to hang out in the deep ocean. They look essentially like giant stretched out dolphins. It's like they took a big dolphin and then added several meters of extra body between the dorsal fin and the pectoral fins. From the little that we know about them, it seems that only males have teeth that protrude from the gums, and they use them in combat with other males. They usually only have 1 or 2 tusk-like pairs of teeth, and sometimes they actually inhibit feeding, so they're not for catching food. In fact, despite having jaws somewhat like those of dolphins, beaked whales are primarily suction feeders, feeding at depths of up to 500 meters primarily on squid that they find using echolocation. They're found in oceans all over the world, but only where those oceans are deep, hence they're rarely seen. The next most distantly related clade of toothed whales include 2 families. These families are the South American river dolphins of the family Iniidae, which I had the opportunity to see in the wild earlier this year during my time in the Amazon. I'll put a whole playlist of videos from that trip right here, just in case you want to see what else we saw. And the La Plata dolphin of the family Pontoporeidae, which I had no idea even existed. So the answer is yes, there are even more cetaceans that have completely managed to swim under my sonar. Now let's be clear, neither of these are true dolphins, but again, they have a similar form because long skinny jaws are good for catching fish. So let's start with the one I did know about, the one I just got to see while in Peru, the river dolphins of the family Aeneidae. These guys are another freshwater cetacean, and they are built for maneuverability over speed. They have highly flexible necks that allow them to turn their heads quite a lot. Their dorsal fins are greatly reduced so they don't get caught on obstacles. They also have relatively poor vision and hunt a wide diversity of prey primarily using echolocation. They are the largest of the river dolphins, with some males being as long as 2.5 meters and weighing over 400 pounds. Females, on the other hand, are considerably smaller. Though they once had a larger range, this family is now found only in South American river systems. And we will soon have a whole video about them because there are some crazy legends regarding these unusual cetaceans. Apparently they're quite evil. And if you're enjoying talking about whales today, you should know we have an entire additional video on whales available exclusively to our patrons at Patreon. So if you'd be interested in seeing that video or a host of other videos we have just for our patrons, please check it out. Now, their closest living relatives are a group of cetaceans that I only discovered to exist because I was making this video. This would be the La Plata dolphin of the family Pontoporeidae. And, like their closest living relatives, these two are not true dolphins. And this is the only river dolphin that doesn't live exclusively in fresh water. They spend a lot of time in the brackish waters off the coast of southeastern South America. Brackish waters are waters where salt concentrations are higher than fresh water, but lower than the ocean, and are usually found where fresh water flows into the sea. These are some of the smallest cetaceans, maxing out at under 6 feet. Well under 2 meters, and up to 15% of that length is just their beak-like jaws. These have the longest jaws for their length of any cetacean. They only weigh around 100 pounds. But they look more like true dolphins than the other river dolphins, probably because they're out in open waters more than other river dolphins. They sort of look like small, tiny-eyed, long-faced bottlenose dolphins. And they pretty much just cruise around slowly on the ocean floor eating whatever they can catch and watching out for sharks and orcas. Like most river dolphins, they have some dinky eyeballs, so I would assume that they're using mostly echolocation to find prey and detect predators. And that gets us to the largest clade of toothed whales, the Delphinoidea. This clade contains the final 3 toothed whale families: the Monodontidae, the belugas and narwhals, the Phocinidae, the porpoises, and the Delphinidae, the true dolphins. Of those 3, the 2 most related to one another are the Monodontidae and the Phocinidae. The Monodontidae contains 2 of the most wonderful of all cetaceans. These would be the belugas and the narwhals. These 2 amazing whales both live in the Arctic Ocean as well as the northernmost regions of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. They are between 3 and 5 meters long. They have a ridge down their back, but no dorsal fin. Their necks are highly flexible, unlike most whales that have fused neck vertebrae. And they do not have long beaks that protrude past the melon, like many of the other toothed whales we've been discussing. Though male narwhals do have something pretty amazing protruding past their melons. Now, I really don't know which one is more amazing. I mean, male narwhals look basically like spotted belugas with a unicorn horn protruding from their faces. That horn is actually a modified left canine tooth, a tusk, that protrudes from their upper jaw. Belugas, on the other hand, are beautiful all-white whales that seem to have the most playful demeanor, perhaps of any creature. I've seen them playing fetch in the wild with fishermen on their boats. And in captivity, they just seem like they're having a great time all of the time. It's hard to say there is a more lovable animal anywhere. They just bring joy to the soul. The closest relatives to these 2 delightful whales are the porpoises of the family Phocinidae. Though they're more closely related to belugas and narwhals than they are to dolphins, they look a heck of a lot like dolphins. Probably mostly due to the fact that their necks are not highly flexible and they have dorsal fins. If you find yourself staring into the mouth of a cute little dolphin-like whale, you might notice that it has flat teeth instead of the cone-shaped teeth of dolphins. It might also lack the long beak possessed by the majority of dolphins. If this turns out to be the case, you are probably looking at a porpoise and not a dolphin. Like I said, these guys are pretty small, between 1.4 and 2.3 meters when fully grown, with all of them weighing less than an adult male gorilla. Which isn't small, but for a whale it's dinky. Like pretty much all members of the toothed whales, and particularly the Delphinoidea, they are carnivores that eat fish, mollusks, and about any other animal they can capture, kill, and swallow. They are found across the world's oceans and even in some freshwater habitats, such as the Yangtze River. They hunt using echolocation, like pretty much all toothed whales. Now, the main group that you might confuse with the porpoises would be their closest relatives, other than the belugas and narwhals, the true dolphins of the family Delphinidae. This is the most speciose of all whale families. True dolphins can range in size from over a meter to almost 10 meters, over 30 feet. You're probably familiar with the bottlenose dolphin, like flipper, but you may be surprised to find out that species like pilot whales and orcas are also dolphins. Most are closer in size and shape to bottlenose dolphins with a long beak protruding past their melon, but that is clearly not present in all species. They have inflexible necks like porpoises, but cone-shaped teeth that really set them apart. Dolphins are exceedingly intelligent. Orcas have the second largest brain of any animal on Earth, behind only my favorite whale, the sperm whale. The brain of a bottlenose dolphin, while smaller than the orca brain, is both larger and more complex than a human brain. You choose what to do with that information. With around 40 species described, they are found in ocean habitats all over the world. And that brings us to the other big clade of whales, the Mysticedae baleen whales. And when I say big, well, there are only 3 families and about 16 species of baleen whales. But they include the biggest animals that have ever existed on this planet. So the group may not be as diverse as the toothed whales, with only 16 species, but they are huge. I mean, the smallest of them all is 6 meters or 20 feet long and well over 3 tons. And again, the largest is the largest animal ever to live on this planet. So it seems absurd to call them a small group, even if there are only 16 species. Baleen whales are differentiated from the toothed whales by the fact that they have baleen instead of teeth. Baleen is not a modified tooth. It is composed of keratin, like fingernails and hair, and is derived from the skin. They do develop teeth before birth, but they're soon lost, and they're not used for feeding. Baleen varies in length from half a meter to about 3.5 meters, almost 12 feet depending on the species. Baleen whales do not generally hunt large prey as do toothed whales, but rather hunt massive numbers of tiny prey, such as schools of fish, krill, and plankton. Now, generally, the amounts of energy provided by such small prey is not sufficient to justify large animals hunting it down. It certainly wouldn't justify the largest animals ever to exist on this planet hunting it down, but baleen makes this possible. Whales scoop up enormous quantities of water into their mouths, which include schools of fish, krill, or plankton. But instead of swallowing the water, which would fill their stomachs and greatly reduce the quantity of prey that they could actually swallow and process, they push the water out through the baleen and sift out the animals. In addition to baleen, members of the clade Mysticedae can be identified by their blowholes, as they have paired blowholes instead of the single blowhole possessed by the toothed whales. The 3 Mysticedae families are the Balanidae, the Balanopteridae, and the Cedotheridae. The smallest of these families, and I mean that in every sense of the word, is the family Cedotheridae. This family today is composed of only 1 species, the dainty little pygmy right whale. As we mentioned earlier, these guys are only about the size of an F-350 Super Duty, and are the smallest of the baleen whales, though they are the size of a pretty darn huge pickup truck. I mean, they're born as long as an NBA center. The rest of the family are all extinct, and some phylogenies even dispute including the pygmy right whales in the Cetotheridae, which would make it even smaller, with 0 living species. Assuming that they are part of the family, there is just the one species, and these guys live in a small band of temperate waters in the southern hemisphere where they feed on schools of tiny crustaceans. They've only been observed a handful of times at sea, and most of what we know about them comes from dead individuals that have washed up on shore. Their closest living relatives are, interestingly enough, not the right whales. So pygmy right whale is probably a bad common name for them. They're more closely related to the rorquals of the family Balanopteridae. I'll be honest, rorqual was a new word to me. But these are some familiar whales. Among the 10 rorqual species are whales like gray whales, humpback whales, and the largest animal ever to exist on planet Earth, the blue whale. This group can be easily identified by the folds extending from just behind their lower jaws, often down to their bellies, allowing for tremendous expansion when feeding. They're found in oceans all over the world. These whales are also much more streamlined in appearance than the final family of baleen whales, the family Balanidae. This family contains 3 species of right whales as well as the bowhead whale. And bowhead isn't a bad description. They have faces that look a little bit like a pelican with its gular pouch full of water. They have a very narrow upper jaw and a much larger lower jaw, and their mouth often forms a bow-like shape. They look deeply, deeply dissatisfied with the world. Maybe it's because they aren't the closest relatives of the pygmy right whales, and that just isn't right. More like pygmy wrong whales, right? Am I right? Moving on. This crazy mouth allows them to have huge baleen and to feed in a way very different from what the other baleen whales do. Instead of gulping in huge amounts of water and pushing it back out through the baleen, they practice ram feeding. They just swim near the surface for minutes at a time with their mouths open, gathering small animals on their baleen, and then they scrape them off with their huge tongues like Jabba the Hutt. They're found in temperate and tropical waters in both the northern and southern hemispheres. And those are all of the whales. I definitely discovered some I didn't know about. Which ones were new to you, and which group should we cover next? As always, like and subscribe, and we hope to see you real soon. In addition to baleen, members of the clade Mysticeti can be identified by their blowholes.